Welcome back, everyone. So this is a very introductory session to Part B. So far in our series presented to you by NLTI, we have covered some of the sessions which go through different parts of this exam, which are under Part A. Today, we are going to make a very brief headway into Part B of NLSAT, which is a very different component from Part A and involves answer writing. So it's a subjective component in this paper. And we are going to discuss what does that look like? What are the kind of questions that come in Part B? What is the basic expectation from a student who's writing a Part B answer? And what are some general, for instance, the cutoff in the Part B or expected range of scoring in Part B? All such basic things is what we're going to discuss in this session. So starting off with the very basics, first of all, we'll look at what the structure of the paper looks like in the Part B. So you have roughly 6 questions worth 10 marks each, and then you also have an essay, which is 15 marks. These 6 questions, as stated below, are largely situation-based questions where you will be given a particular fact scenario, which is fictional fact scenario, and you're required to decide a dispute based on that fact scenario. Now, what is the more unknowing part about the Part B is that, firstly, the questions will generally be somewhere around 200 to 300 words. So these are detailed questions. You will not find very short questions, which are merely a paragraph long, but these are generally very detailed and long questions. So you have to have a good reading speed. You have to have some good amount of comprehension skills to be able to go through that many number of words in a very short span of time. As I said, you can generally expect quite long and detailed questions in Part B because you're expected to focus on the facts given to you in the question. Because through those facts, you're going to weave your answer and you're going to write your material. So you'll have to rely upon what's given to you in the question itself to write your answer, which is why if the question is very detailed and very long, that may not always be a bad thing because it gives you more content to write in your own answer because you're trying to take that content from the question itself, which is why if sometimes you have a short question, again, it may not always be a good thing because you might have lesser content to derive from the question. Now, as I stated, questions are situational based and are inspired from case scenarios. So if there is any case, for instance, 2 people got into a fight, one of them injured the other person. So you'll be given a very detailed problem scenario about how these 2 people met, how they got into a fight, who caused an injury to the other person, what led to the situation, what happened before they met each other, and so on and so forth. So you'll be given a very detailed scenario, and then eventually you'll be asked who should be held liable or who should not be held liable. And then you'll have to justify based on whatever the fact scenario is given to you. Towards the end of this, I'll also show you a few sample questions. So you can just pause the video and read those questions. They are taken from the previous year question papers of NLSAT. Now, when it comes to answers as to how long your answer should be, the general word limit, which the paper allows you to go till, is 300 to 350 words. This will roughly look like a page, a single side sheet of A4 size paper, front and back. So you'll be given that much amount of space to write an answer long enough, which will cover around 300 to 350 words. Now, this may not always be possible for all students to write that much. Firstly, if you can write that much, that's an ideal word limit because in Part B, you're generally given sufficient amount of time, or at least you're expected to manage your time in such a way that you have enough time that you can write such a long answer. But students oftentimes struggle to reach up to this word limit, especially if they have to also write an essay towards the end, which is around 500 words. So to write around 300 to 350 words for 6 questions and then also to write an essay is no easy task. So that's why many times students ask what should be the bare minimum that we should at least try to reach for us to have or be able to write a good enough answer. We generally say that at least at the very least 200 to 225 words is what you should aim towards. The reason is, although there can be no hard and fixed rule as to what should be the minimum amount, or that if you have touched 200 words, then you'll automatically be given better marks, as opposed to if you are not able to touch that many words. The simple logic is that given that questions are so detailed and given that you're given so much information to work with, that many number of words at the very least is expected from you to at least be able to cover everything at a very basic level that is provided to you in the question. So if the question is giving you so much content and material, at the very least, you should try and engage everything that's given. At least make use of that information to build your arguments or to build your reasons. So if you take a that many number of words, it shows that you have understood the question. It shows that how, or it shows that you can also use the information given in the question to build your arguments, and it shows that you have understood largely what's happening in the question and what are the main issues that are present in the question. So that's why this is the bare minimum limit that we think would be an ideal if you're not somehow able to go up till 300 words. So this is about how much you should write and how much space you'll be given to write. Now, onto the substantive part of what should answer writing look like. Now, a very simple description, if I had to give you, of what answer writing in Part B is basically common sense packed into good structure is the ingredient for a good answer. Part B does not require you very sophisticated legal knowledge. Now, this is very important because you can highlight this as if you're starting to prepare or if this is your first time interacting with the Part B format of NLSAT. You're never really expected to know something extraordinary to write Part B answers. And by that, I mean you're not expected to know any legal jargons. You're not expected to even be familiar with prior legal concepts. What you're expected to be familiar with is basic common sense and how to use simple principles. As we go into the series, I'll introduce you to what those basic principles look like, but you're generally just expected to use common logic that you would use otherwise as well. There is nothing exceptional or nothing out of the way that you're required to know. If there were any such requirements, the exam itself would ask you that you're expected to be familiar with so and so concepts. But that's not really the case, which is why the most important requirement in Part B is that you're able to utilize your common sense and you're able to put it together in a good structure. That's more important. How do you present your arguments? How do you use the information given in the question to build your arguments is a lot more important thing than maybe using some concept which would you think would make you stand out from the crowd. This is about how to basically describe your Part B. A very, very brief introduction to what marking pattern looks like. Now, many students ask what should and how much should we score in the Part B to be on the safe side. Now, this is the score of the candidates that have or that attempted the NLSAT 2024, and that's how much they have scored. The topper having a score of 47 out of 75, and then the rank 2 having somewhere around 42. And then as we go down. Now, what you need to keep in mind is that just to give you a very brief idea of what the cutoff ideally should look like for you as a candidate who's preparing for an LSAT is that at least try to score above 40. That should be at least the minimum amount of marks that you should be aiming towards. For a moment, I just showed you the marks of the people that have given the NLSAT's latest paper, but do not use that as a benchmark because for different years, the checking will always vary. And the reason is it's a subjective component. If it were part A, which is objective, the cutoff will always stay somewhere around the periphery of plus minus 5 or even plus minus 2 or 3. It will not deviate too much from that. But part B cutoffs will always change year by year because it's a subjective component. The people who are checking it will differ, and the way students write answers will also differ from every year. Which is why I would say that for your own practice purposes, and if you're trying to gauge your performance, you should see 40 as a benchmark above which you need to, or at least you should try on an average to score above 40 to feel that you're on the safe side. Anything you score above 45 is always a great score. 40 to 45 is somewhere around a good score, which has a good chance of clearing the exam. But certainly a score of 45 and above will always keep you or will always help you stand out from the crowd and will make sure that you have a good rank in this exam. Now, what are some expectations? Now, if this is a checklist to see what all you're expected to do in part B, which are some basic things you should check off when you are gauging your own performance in your mock tests, or if you're just trying to see where you stand. The first is that finishing the part B on time is very important. For that, you need to know what should be the amount of time you should spend on part B. Ideally, if I would say that the maximum that you can spend on part B is around 1.5 hours, which is 90 minutes. And the minimum that you should try and spend in part B is at least 70 minutes. This is for those who can at least, maybe they can compensate for the lack of time by writing faster, or for people who feel they need to take more time in part A, so they cannot compromise with that. So they need to somehow allocate less time to part B. So the range that you can work within to manage your time in part B is around 70 to 90 minutes is what you should aim for. Now, the line I've written, which is equal division of time between questions, looks very simple, but is very, very important. Many a times what students do is that they'll allocate excessively more time to few questions in part B which leaves them with very little time for other questions. Now, keep in mind, even if you spend a lot of time on a particular question in part B, maybe because you are able to understand that question a little well, or maybe because in one of your prior mocks you witnessed a similar question, so you feel more comfortable attempting that, you will not get too many extra marks for attempting that question with more time, because students do that often. They'll think that this question is somewhere in their comfort area, so they'll give, as I said, an inordinate amount of time to that question. Even if you spend, let's say, about 10 minutes in writing an answer to a question, and if you spend 15 minutes in writing an answer to the same question, maybe at the very best you'll gain an extra mark, 1 mark or maybe 1.5 marks. That will be the amount of difference it will make. But it costs the time for the other answers that you were supposed to write within the same time frame, and the amount of marks you will lose in other questions is a lot more, because then you're left with very little time and you're somewhere, you feel hurried up with other answers and you're not able to do a good job. Which is why, try in your mock tests itself while you're practicing to give an equal amount of time, so that you do not feel rushed up while attempting other questions and while writing other answers. If you are very familiar with a question, give your best, but make sure that you are attempting that answer in a stipulated time frame, such that it does not take away time from other questions. Second is understanding what the question is asking from you. Read the question very carefully. The key to writing part B answers is to treat your question like a Bible. The question will tell you everything you need to do, from telling you what you're actually expected to do, as in if you're whether if you have to either decide in whose favor are you going to give a certain judgment in the question, or be it if you are supposed to defend a particular side, or if you're supposed to argue in favor of a certain side. All of that question will tell you that, but also the content of your answer will also come from the question. I that you have to treat your question like a Bible. All the information will flow from it, and your answers, basic pillars, will be built around the information given in the question. Later on, how you use that information to persuasively build your argument is a separate thing, but at least the basic foundation of your answer is built on the information given in the question. Third is managing to cover basic arguments, which is that the very simple expectation from you is that what all basic arguments come to your mind. So when I'll show you a question, I want you to pause this video, read that question, and think of the arguments that come in your mind. All the arguments that do come in your mind, at least you should try and write them on the sheet as well in the exam, and you should try and explain them to a reasonable extent. Sometimes students feel that I need to think something out of the box, something creatively so different that no one else has thought of, for me to gain some extra marks in this exam. That's not really the case. Even if you're writing basic arguments, will fetch you good marks. Or at least if you do this consistently across all the 6 questions, they'll fetch you good enough marks to at least help you clear this exam. Maybe it'll not get you the topper ranks, but this is the basic expectation that you should try to look towards. Fourth is, what does reasonable extent mean? I'll explain this a little more, which is that you should have logical connections, clarity, and a little bit of reasoning in your answer. The last thing is to engaging with counter viewpoints. Every answer will always have two sides, or sorry, at least every question has two sides, which is that one side that you're going to defend or you're going to decide in favor of, and the other side. When you're writing an answer, if you've decided to, let's say, argue in the side of, or argue in favor of one particular side, you're also expected to engage with the counter viewpoints that might flow from the other side. So you're expected to first preempt what can possibly be some counter viewpoints coming from the other side, and then accordingly respond to them in your answer as well. This is very similar to how when you're writing any analytical piece, you're always expected to also show some engagement with what the counter arguments would be. This makes your answer more comprehensive and also shows that you have actually thought through the question and you have thought through what possible scenarios can come up in this. Now, I mentioned 3 things which should be there in your answer, which is logical connection, which is that one sentence should flow onto another by a logical link, and one should not be left thinking, how have you come to a certain conclusion in the answer? This is a very basic requirement, which is that the sentences which are connected together in your answer should have some sort of link with each other, and that they should not look like disjointed. They should not look like as if the person is reading your answer, it shouldn't feel that one sentence has randomly flowed into another sentence and that there is no intermediate link in between them. So there should be some kind of logical connectivity in your answer that you're writing. Second one is very important, and many times students missed out on it, is clarity. the reason this is important is because when you're writing your answer or when you're thinking of your answer in your own head, you think that it's very clear and it's coming across clear to the other person. But it's only when, maybe if, let's say, someone else is checking your sheet, or if you're reading your own answer again for, let's say, second or third time, you realize that maybe what you've written can either come across as very complex, or sometimes it's just not conveying the meaning you think you're trying to convey. Which is why clarity is very important, because it's a subjective component. Sometimes the students might weave a certain answer in their mind, and when they're writing it, it doesn't come across in the same way. Which is why clarity is very important. Try and keep your answer simple. Do not overcomplicate it by using very difficult words, or do not complicate it by using very difficult concepts. The more you keep it simple, the better your answer will be. The third component is analysis, which is arguing an answer comprehensively. When you're writing any answer, you have to consider various facets of it. When any problem scenario is given to you, do not just look at what's obvious on the face of it, but also look at what are other facets and perspectives involved in that question. And when you do that, the depth of your answer also increases. From this point onwards, you start separating yourself from the rest of the crowd, because the more analytical your answer is, the better it's going to come across during the assessment. So when you're looking at that question, look at it more holistically. Look at what are the different possible scenarios that you can come, or that can possibly come out of that question, and how can you use them in your answer. So this is about analysis and the basic things that you're required to do. Now, these are some previous year papers. You can just pause the video, because I'll be very quickly skimming through them, so you can just read them at your own convenience. All of these questions have been taken from the NLSAT 2022 exam. So this should give you an actual idea into how the examiner is framing the Part B questions. This question is one of the sample questions provided to the students before the NLSAT 2024 paper. So over the years, in the last 3 years, they have kept the format more or less similar. There hasn't been many radical changes in how the questions are asked in Part B. So that's about how you are expected to view these questions. And for your own purposes, you can just read these questions and try and make some arguments. So this is all about this session. We'll discuss and we'll go more into the finer details of answer writing in the Part B, and all the expectations from you, especially with respect to what should be the substantive content of your answer. We'll discuss that in some of our future sessions. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope this session was useful.